Okay, so before we completely get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items and let you know how to participate in today's web event. What I'm showing you on the screen is the control panel. It's the master control for this webinar. If you want to minimize your control panel, simply just click the orange arrow. The audio pane provides audio information. You have the flexibility to join the webinar via microphone or speakers or via telephone. At the end of the presentation, we will have a Q&A session to answer questions from the audience at any point during the webinar. Feel free to type into this question box and click send, and we'll answer as many of these questions as we have time for. You can raise your hand during the presentation. We may ask a question, and this option is here located in the grab tab. And finally, but not least, today's webinar is being recorded so you can review later or share with a colleague. Everyone will receive an email with a link to this recording within 48 hours. Okay, and like I said, thanks, Jeff. I am Richard Ty. I'm product manager here at Application Security. Today's agenda is pretty simple. Our talk should go for about 20-25 minutes. We're going to focus on, what are metrics. Quickly, we'll go over that. We'll focus on what metrics make sense for database security, and we'll count down the top 5 reports, and then we'll close with our Q&A session. So why do we keep score? And I really don't want to overcomplicate this, but metrics is really about statistics to measure performance or, or sometimes pain. And to really make it easy, I'm a big sports fan. I love reading stat sheets, before and after games, and individual numbers. They tell us something. A group of numbers, they really tell us a story. And decisions are really made on those metrics and those statistics that we review. And it's just, the same is true also, if you play the market. I mean, that's the whole reason why we keep score. We make decisions based on that. Esteemed Gartner analyst Jeff Wheatman, he defined his terminology for security metrics at a recent security conference, and he stated that metrics should help you communicate what you do, why you do it, and how well you do it. So in other words, they should inform, educate, and stimulate change, plain and simple. So for those of us who are focusing on database security, where should we focus? So I've got 3 different topics up here about where we should focus. So let me kind of go through this very quickly, and then we'll go into some of the details about this. Inventory. We need to catalog what we have. And what we should catalog are about our databases, about our users' roles and objects within the databases, and the security tools that we use. We need to focus on the issues that are uncovered by our tools. And there are several ways to get metrics. And combined with the different ways of getting metrics and data about security, a combined view will help us get the larger picture of where our security risks lie. So diagnostics are tests that are performed at scheduled intervals, or you could think of it as point in time. Trends and change are derived from having those repeated tests. And incident data are real-time metrics as things happen, as they occur. And finally, with all this data that we get to consume, at some point we do need to present it and review it at 30,000 level, so enterprise-wide. When we examine from that perspective, we need to simplify and normalize our metrics to be able to compare and assess, and a scoring metric like a risk score is suitable there. So we'll take a look at that also. So drilling into this, inventory databases. Why do we care to do that? Well, we should always catalog our systems. We need to know what we have in our inventory so we can protect those systems, those databases, because if you don't know about them, how are you going to protect them? And if you have something in your inventory, you can make a decision on whether it requires governance or not. And so when we look at our inventory, what specifically should we track about our databases? We should break it out by organization and break it out by business attributes. You can divide that up by your different lines of businesses, by your database types, whether it's a production or development system. You have to determine and categorize what makes sense for you and makes sense for your business. And then within each of those categories, define the number of databases, what type of database is it? Is it a Microsoft SQL Server database? Is it an Oracle database? Is it a Sybase database? Is it a DB2 database? running on ZOS, to determine what type it is, what version of that database, what patch level it's up to, and the specific name and port that it actually runs on, and also track all of the different components of that make up that specific database. If it has a replication server, if it's got an Oracle listener, if there's a redirector service for a SQL Server database, these are the types of things that should be tracked and included in your inventory. Besides looking at it from the system level, we should inventory the inside of the database. What makes up the schemas of the databases themselves? We want to know the population of what is in there. And the reason we care about that, because what makes up the database, because it actually is supporting an application, it is supporting an actual business process. And some of that data that's in there is probably regulated. And the data that's in there is regulated would determine a different scope for security controls. We need to look at the different users and privileges within there, because the violations of least privileges will add risk to your system and add overall risk to your security infrastructure. So by having that inventory, we can actually correct any excessive privileges and address those issues. So what should we track? We should track the number of users, roles, and objects within the database. Get a good inventory of what's in there, and also of all the privileges that are applied to all the users, roles, and the objects themselves from their perspectives. In gathering the privileges, the key things to track about privileges are, what the privilege is, who granted the privilege, meaning who gave the privilege away to someone else, and the grant path itself. The grant path is actually the path to which a privilege was given to someone. In the database world, you can actually give privileges in multiple ways, granting a specific privilege by role, by role, by role. But having the grant path is important, because if it's determined that there is an excessive privilege, you can correct the issue because you know exactly where the change is. We should also look at inventory our database security tools. We need to know what our security tools are, because we need to keep current on our threat landscape. Security technology is really a cat and mouse game, meaning that your tools are only as good as recent as the latest vulnerabilities and threats. The things that we need to track for are, what those new vulnerabilities and threats are. New vulnerabilities and threats can make it out into your environment at any point and could present a risk to your infrastructure. So it's important to track what is out there from different organizations and from different news feeds and security feeds that are out there. And from products that you use, it's very important to keep up with upgrading the technology, because the environment does change. And so having the latest software and the latest knowledge bases that will allow you to keep track of the various vulnerabilities and threats that are encompassing the environment today. Let's walk into the issues at this point and look at it from a diagnostic perspective, which is a point-in-time assessment. And why should we care? Because we need to know where we stand from a security perspective. And a point in time is a snapshot, it's a test. It gives you an exhaustive report card based on your policies, based on your checklist of what are the important security items to check for. And when you actually perform an assessment, it helps you prioritize your security efforts and your compliance efforts for continuous monitoring. So what should you track for? Track for the number of vulnerabilities and occurrences. Specifically, make sure you include the risk ratings for your vulnerabilities. If it's a vulnerability, it should include a CVE identifier. Also include root cause analysis within those vulnerabilities to be able to identify, here's the vulnerability, and this is how you address the particular problem. We also need to look at privileged users. So to track privileged users, you need to be able to determine how much a user is like an administrator. And there is something called an administrative likeness score that you can look at to determine whether a user is similarly powerful to an administrator, or if they're less like an administrator and much more like a more low privileged users. Privileged users also include the number of databases they have access to. These are the types of data points that should be tracked. We also need to look at the process to which we set out and develop our security programs. So we should also put a focus on frequency of tests. We need to determine in our organizations how often should we be scanning our databases, and then take a look at if we are actually meeting those specific goals, because we want to keep a repeated progress. We need to keep a repeated process, a demonstrable process, to determine if we're collecting a certain freshness level of the security results in our security results. So the type of information that should be collected there are the number of assets scanned and the number of assets that haven't been scanned. Because if you can determine the number of assets scanned, you can continuously drill into the information related to those specific databases. And for the ones that you haven't scanned, you can go back and ask the questions of why hasn't this specific database been scanned? Should it be scanned? Do we know enough information about the risk of that specific database? And does it require any type of regulatory governance? Looking at issues from a trend perspective, when we have multiple point-in-time diagnostic assessments, we will have collected enough information to determine trends and change. And the reasons we want to look at trends is fairly obvious. We want to determine the effectiveness of our security programs. We want to know if we are reducing our risks over time. So we would like to constantly see trends running downward, where number of vulnerabilities are going down. And we want to be able to take a look at the amount of effort that we put in to determine if we're using our resources effectively. If certain parts of the program showcases a flat line, or if risk happens to be running upwards instead of downward, we have decisions to make if we should be reprioritizing the way we work. So what should we be tracking? We should track the number of assets, which in our case for database security programs are the databases themselves. We need to determine what's new. What are new assets that have showed up on our network, showed up in our infrastructure, and understand why those databases are now there. Were they installed by a third-party application? Were they installed by a developer? Were they simply brought up because we have a very dynamic environment or a virtualized environment? So we need to keep track of the assets that are on our infrastructure, because databases are fairly complex applications that typically have a lot of privileged capabilities to the network itself. We need to track risk scores, and we can create risk scores based on vulnerability counts. We can create risk scores based on privileged users by looking at the privileges and looking at the number of privileged users as well as the number of explicit grants. Explicit grants being a specific type of privilege that can be granted within the database that is considered a poor security practice. We can also look at issues from a real-time perspective, and we can look at incidents. And the reason we care about that is because we want to be able to alert on suspicious activity as it happens. We also want to be able to keep an audit trail of activities as occur if they violate policies, and so we can keep an audit trail for that investigation. So what should be tracked in an audit trail? We need to keep track of the events and alert counts. We want to keep those broken down by risk, broken down by category or a specific incident type, whether it's a password attack, whether it's actually an exploit of a vulnerability, or whether it's a system type event. And inside an audit trail itself, we do want to keep track of the basic who, what, when, where, and how items of an audit trail. The who's are the specific user that's connected to the database. We want to know the database user. We want to know the network user that's connected. What is the event? We want to make sure we know what the event type is. We want to collect the exact SQL statements that are being executed. We want to have the identified risk for that specific event, if it's a high, a medium, or a low type of event, or if it's simply an informational event that you want to collect for an audit trail. And we also want to know for the specific event, if this is an incident, what is the immediate corrective action that should take place? And that should be provided as part of a knowledge base for an audit trail. We want to know when the event occurred. We need to know the exact time of the occurrence. Where did it take place? We want to know which database was targeted. We want to know where the source of the event actually took place from, if it came from an application server, if it came from a specific application somewhere else on the network. We do want to know where that is. And we want to know how. We want to know what that application is and what type of connection. And with all that information, we really want to look at some point, we do need to boil this up to a much higher level and look at it enterprise-wide. And the reason we want to pull up into scores is we don't really always want to look at it from a series of multiple metrics. We do like to normalize information so we can actually compare disparate units, for example, different lines of businesses, different departments, different ways our database groups are working, whether it's the Oracle group or the SQL Server group. But depending on the way you build out your business and the way you build out your organization, there is a natural way for you to want to look at that information. And a risk score is great for comparing the way we work enterprise-wide. And one of the main benefits of actually comparing against different departments or different groups is when you allow information to be shown publicly amongst your colleagues and your peers, it helps to simulate behavioral and cultural change in your organizations. If you have a cultural change to want to include more of a security culture, having a score that allows someone to see how well a retail organization is doing compared to an investment organization, you can make a number of different decisions. You can foster education between your different business units, departments, and colleagues themselves. You can drill into understanding what practices are working within the retail organization versus what may not be working in the investment organization. And you can facilitate a little bit more information sharing from a security perspective, and understanding exactly where those risks are across your enterprise helps you decide from a corporate perspective where it makes sense to prioritize resources. So what should we track? We can track a risk score by organization. We can track a risk score by asset. So all the different databases within an organization, you can actually drill down to a specific database level, so you can see which databases have more risk than another. And of course, if you're checking diagnostically, checklists of your corporate security baselines against each database, you should be able to create pass-fail indicators for each and every check that you're testing against your databases. So with that said, I'd like to start the wrap-up about what we're focusing here. So what we just went over, an inventory. Tracking your inventory, you have to know what you have. Issues. Collect security metrics from various different types of methodologies, from point in time, which is diagnostic, trends, which is based on having repeated snapshots of your point-in-time assessments to be able to determine change, whether you're doing good or not so good. And of course, tracking real-time incidents so that you can actually determine specifically what changes have been occurring. And then to boil all that up from an enterprise-wide perspective, normalization of the data scores to give you a specific risk score. And so let me count down what I think are the top 5 reports that will help you with your database security program. So number 5, test frequency. You want to audit your own security process. You want to be able to meet your own security level agreements. So for each database, know when the last time you actually performed the penetration test. Know the last time you were able to perform a deep granular security review against your corporate security baseline. Know when the last time you had fresh data for all the entitlements in your database, the rights review. And also know the last time an alert occurred on your database, the last time an incident was received. And using that information, using all of that information, should be able to help you facilitate a review of your processes and all the data collected to ensure that the processes you have in place are those results reviewed. Number 4, scan versus not scanned. So for all your databases, simply just know if you've been able to perform diagnostic testing against them. You want to be able to do this to meet your security level agreements again. Which databases have been scanned and which have not. The databases that have been scanned, how often were they scanned, and what were the results of those scans? And the ones that haven't been scanned, why haven't they been scanned? Do they need to be? Do they fall under any type of regulatory governance that should be brought into one of your security programs? Number 3, looking at your most privileged users. Having an administrative likeness score for all the different database users across all of your different databases. An administrative likeness score will help you identify your privileged users. And one of the things to do there is also to ignore some well-known accounts. The objective is really to find specific types of users that may not be specifically defined as administrators, but in fact may act very much like one. And having such a score will help facilitate your ability to focus your resources on examining for violation of least privileges within a certain set of users. As well, it helps to facilitate the identification of specific user candidates for activity monitoring. Number 2, taking that data and applying it to root cause analysis, understanding the findings that you have under which category of issues are they being addressed to. By understanding where the bulk of your problems are and what the cause of them is, will help you to facilitate decision support on your remediation efforts. If you have a lot of issues in a particular place from a high, medium, and low perspective or a specific count, you can make a decision on where it makes sense to apply your resource, whether it's in terms of patching on a more frequent basis or making privilege changes to certain objects and packages within the database, or dealing with or focusing on password controls. Having a root cause analysis will help to do that. And finally, but not least, I think the number one report to have is a risk by organization. To take a risk score and compare communities against each other in an effort to, at a very high level, easily compare and affect behavior and cultural change from a security perspective across your enterprise. So with that said, with application security, and these are our database security solutions, I just want to close up and let you know, everyone here that's out on the line, that we do have 2 different database security product lines. We do have one called App Detector Pro, which is our tactical database security scanner. It's a tactical point-in-time scanner for IT auditors, advisors, security consultants, as well as security groups to be able to perform remote scanning in less than 15 minutes. And on the right side, we do have DB Protect, which is our strategic database security platform intended for IT security operations to help you build out a repeatable and demonstrable database security program. And with that said, this wraps up our webinar. If you're interested, feel free to contact me and contact us to get a sample booklet of the top 5 reports that are presented here, or to contact us to get a complete book of the different sample reports that are provided by all of our solutions. And if you're interested in evaluating your own database security in 15 minutes or less, come by and download a copy of our App Detective Pro, and contact us if you're interested in evaluating DB Protect for your own organization. And finally, but not least, if you're already using DB Protect, just want to let you know that we are currently having a beta for that product. If you're interested in joining our group of beta testers for upcoming release, feel free to drop me a line at artsci@appsecinc.com or techpreview@appsecinc.com. And thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Jeff, back to you.
Yeah. So we're going to actually answer a couple of questions now. If you do have a question, please go ahead and type that into the question and answer box within the control panel. We'll start out with one of our more popular questions, which is, will we get a copy of this presentation? Can we get a copy of this presentation? I'll just take that, Rich. Yes, within 24 to 48 hours, we are actually recording this webinar, and look for an email with a link to that recording within about 24 to 48 hours. Next question we will get to is it's about the data that's stored. So with the mass amount of data stored in the database, how is performance affected?
Well, I think when we're looking at it from a metrics perspective, there isn't much of a concern from a performance perspective for our databases themselves. When we collect information from, and I assume this question is, and the way I'm answering this question, I assume it's for a question about our products, so I'm answering from that perspective. When we're talking about performance against a database, it's fairly negligible. When you're performing tests against a database, connection times are fairly minimal to collect information from the database themselves. Most information is processed offline of the databases themselves on a separate reporting system. So performance is usually minimal. That's generally the tenet from a platform development standpoint.
Thanks. Next question. I'm a DBA, and I need my reports. Does DB Protect include reports for me as well as for my management team?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It certainly does. I think we focus on a certain set of high-level metrics here today to help from a decision support perspective. If you are a DBA and you are tasked with the need to actually make the fixes and make the changes on your databases themselves, our products do provide very specific, detailed reporting about all the different findings and violations on a database themselves, with specific articles that include details about understanding what the problem is, why it's been flagged as an issue, as well as providing remediation steps, as well as third-party references to the issues that have been uncovered.
Thanks. Question about real-time data. How does the product handle real-time data inserted into the database from a reporting perspective?
From a real-time perspective, we have a product called DB Protect. There's a real-time activity monitoring component to it. It does offer multiple technologies to collect real-time data from the databases themselves. And there are a number of different collection methods based on the database type and and an operating system. But basically, there's a host version of the product and there's a network version of the product, both collecting real-time information from the databases themselves and storing that information, and then storing that information in a off-site central data repository where the entire audit trail is managed by our product.
Great, and Rich, I'll just add in one additional thing besides the reporting that you can get on that any type of activity that comes into the system. There are alerts and other things that can be triggered based on certain policies. So you both get alerts and reports on any of that real-time data. So you touched base on this, Rich, in the last question, and it's around how things work. Does the solution need agents, or just sysadmin privileges, or just to use it with sysadmin privileges?
So I think that depends. That's more of a loaded question based on what you're really trying to achieve, what your specific requirements are. But in general, I'll speak in general about DB Protect. There are 3 main modules to DB Protect. There is vulnerability management, there is rights management, and there is activity monitoring. And each of those solutions have slightly different deployment capabilities, but they're fairly easy to deploy. They're components of a network scanner, as well as agents or sensors that reside on the database service themselves. But in terms of system privileges for the product, feel free to contact us to evaluate it, and you can get very specific system prerequisites that we can supply to you for that evaluation.
Great. Next question. Can you tell me more about how compliance reporting relates to security? We actually need both.
They kind of go. I mean, they generally go hand in hand together. Security and compliance are very much tied together. From a security reporting perspective, generally a security team's approach is to have very strict baseline configuration requirements for their systems, and which applies to databases also. And so, security reporting, it tends to be a little bit more strict, even stricter than for compliance. Compliance is much more specific to a specific type of regulation or standard for a particular industry. But in any case, the metrics that we've shown here are applicable to both sides.
Right. Should have time for a couple more questions. We're concerned with rogue databases on our network. What happens if a new database pops up on the network? Do you have any way to report on newly added databases?
Yeah, absolutely. We actually have it built into our products to be able to discover new databases and then be able to report on them from a specific time when you're interested in when a database has appeared in your infrastructure. So the answer is yes. It's very easy to see that information.
Okay, now next question. You talked about compliance. What about specifically PCI?
There is specific PCI reporting in our products also, correct? Yes.
Great. This question is about the security of the results. Is the solution tamper-proof?
Yes. I think that's a key portion of having a security product. Centralizing all the security results and performing the storage of an audit trail. Key portion is that at least our products are well designed to be tamper-proof and to be tamper-evident, and to transmit information securely as well as store it securely. But yes, yeah, absolutely.
Great. I have time for two last questions. Can the solution send events to a SIM tool?
Yes, that's actually fairly common to do that. Our products are focused on the databases themselves. Many organizations do invest in different SIM technologies, and we certainly do integrate it with it and complement each other very well.
Great. And last question is, can the tools be used for forensic purposes to store evidence data collected from a breach?
Yeah, very much so. That's one of the key requirements of actually having activity monitoring in place is really to keep a running audit trail of activity from a specific database. Part of it is to react to incidents as they occur, but a very large portion of it is to maintain a audit trail for investigation purposes in case an incident does happen sometime in the future. So an audit trail is there for forensic purposes.
Okay, that's great. Well, that's all the time we have for today. For any questions that we didn't answer, we have those recorded, and we will go ahead and have someone get back in touch with you to help you with your question. Again, thank you very much for attending today. And Rich, any final comments from you?
No, just simply if you're interested, the last slide that's on the board here are a number of different references. Hopefully you've had time to kind of review that and with all our contact information, but surely we love to hear from you. Feel free to contact us. And thanks for taking the time.